morning. I'm Diane Kresh, Director of Arlington Public Library, and I'm joined by Jack Belcher, Director of Technology Services, and we're here to do an oral history with Barbara Donnellan, recently retired County Manager. Good morning, Barbara. How are you?
I'm fine. Good morning. How are you both?
We're great,
well.
and we're looking forward to having a nice chat with you about your illustrious career and what stands out as major accomplishments, and maybe at the end where you'd like to go next. But we'd like to start at the beginning, so please state your full name, tell us a little bit about your roots, where you grew up, and then what brought you to Arlington.
So my full name is Barbara McCarthy Donnellan. I'm originally from New York City. I know I get teased about that a lot, but grew up in New York and went to St. John's University. I heard a lot of Georgetown conversation on the last interview you did with Brosnan. I was like, okay, St. John's will get its name in there. I got my master's and undergraduate from St. John's and went to work for the city of New York under the Koch administration. Mm-hmm. Before that, I worked for GeraldineFerraro, who was running for Congress, and I did an internship while I was in college and met my husband doing that work as well. He moved to Washington and we dated for a number of years. He asked me to get married, but he said, I'm not coming back to New York. So I applied for a job in the New York Times for a budget analyst position with Arlington County. And it was the very first time Arlington County put an ad in the New York Times.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, I'm serious.
Oh, wow.
And I just said, why not? Let's just, try it. So I sent in an application, and I got an interview, which was really funny because it was just for a budget analyst job in Arlington. So before I got married, I came down here and I interviewed and went back up and got married and came back and had a second interview. And I really thought that there was no way I would have gotten hired. It was a very strange interview process, to be candid. But Tony Gardner and Mark Jinks interviewed me, and Tony was from New York, so I think I had a little bit of an edge there with him. And they hired me. So 1983, in the fall, I got married in September, and I started in November.
Oh, wow, that's great. Now, you skipped over GeraldineFerraro.
So,
can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with her?
Sure. When one of my professors was running for Congress, and we were going to work on her campaign. And at the last minute, she backed out because this prosecutor was going to run. And she asked us to work on this prosecutor's campaign. And we were like, well, what's her name? And she said, GeraldineFerraro. And so we did. We decided to work on the campaign because we wanted experience in politics and how to do that. And we worked on Jerry's campaign from day one when she started to run for, she was running against the incumbent Democrat. So it was a really hard campaign, the first campaign. So my husband and I worked through all of her campaigns. I took a leave of absence from here to work on the presidential and the vice presidential campaign. And we had, she considers her kids, and we were very close with her and the family, and have been through our whole married life. And when she died a couple years ago, we went out for the funeral. So she's been a role model for both of us, and was really quite an influence in our lives, and was a great, great woman. She was smart and articulate and a great woman figure for New York and for this country. I thought she did a great job, even on the campaign, as much as that was a difficult one in 1984. I thought she did a great job.
Yeah, when you talk about her being a role model, what I noticed about her was her strength and her strong character, and those are attributes that I always associated with you while I had the privilege of working with you here. So clearly, her influence was strong.
Yeah, she really was. She was so articulate, and so when we would go out campaigning in 1984. Thousands of people would show up. Thousands of people will hold their babies up. And my daughter can now do this and this. And it was overwhelming that I actually thought we could win. I really did. Yeah. And I can remember the night of the election in 1984, and I said, well, I can't believe people didn't go in and just pull the right lever. And she looked at me and she goes, Barbara, do you read the polls? And she was so, she knew exactly what was going on. And she just said, Barbara, you got to read the polls. But it was a great lesson and an opportunity to work with politicians who she really believed in what she did. And you know, having worked for the prosecutors in New York and stuff like that. So she was the first woman in her graduating class from Fordham to go to law school.
Oh,
And so there
wow.
was an awful lot of legacy that she had in her own right.
Right.
And she was a really interesting woman and a very good friend of ours.
So you came to Arlington.
I did.
As a budget analyst.
Senior budget analyst.
Senior budget
I think
analyst.
I was a senior budget
Okay.
analyst.
So tell us a little bit about your career. You had a lot of different positions with the county.
I did. As a matter of fact, I think I had, the way I characterize it, 6 different careers in the county. I was a senior analyst brought on to do Metro. We had just opened, Metro at that point in Arlington went as far as Ballston, and this is 1983. And we had, all of a sudden, Arlington was getting some serious bills. The federal government had picked up a lot of the expenses for the construction costs of Metro. But Arlington was now having to pay a lot more attention to finance. And so my first job was the first Metro analyst to look at the financial stuff on Metro. And then I had other special assignments. And one of my other special assignments was the Ballston Garage. And at the Ballston Mall, we had just done the very first public-private partnership in Virginia. And that was the county with HEX, which was May Company at the time, and all the other interested parties at the mall. And we had we built the parking garage while they renovated Parkington Mall into what was the Ballston Mall. And so this was a very complicated deal, and that was already done by the time I came. But what I had to do was pay the construction draws on the construction of the garage. So I did Metro and I did the Ballston Mall were the 2 major assignments when I first got here. So I stayed in finance for a while, and then I went to economic development and helped out the director of economic development and planning, and helped him kind of get his financial stuff in order. Went from there to libraries.
Right.
And I was the first admin services division chief in libraries, and had a lot of fun trying to figure that out. We started the renovation for Central Library, which it probably needs it already again. And hate to say that, but it's
Right.
sort of a generational thing. The libraries I stayed in for about 8 years. The library director left. I became acting library director for a year, and that was so fun. I have to tell you, it was probably one of the most lovely experiences in the county. Was just being library director, so I envy you some days, as you know. And from library director, I became a tax policy specialist. You might ask my credentials for that, but I wouldn't go too deep on that. Then I did acting director for finance, and then finance director, and then deputy county manager and county manager.
Right.
So several different careers.
Describe a little bit about how you became a manager. I mean, was that something you were wanting to do, or is it something that happened? That you were,
Just manager in general?
general
or
manager. County manager, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
county manager.
Yeah.
No. It's interesting because, you know, I majored in politics and government and did state and local government, and public administration was my major field. And so I always wanted to do government. But, you know, there's some people that are born that go into government and say, well, I want to run a local government. That had never been my objective. I always wanted to do a job in local government and do it as best as I possibly could, and to give back, to make it better than when I got there. And finance I kind of fell into in New York City, so that has kind of been a thread throughout my whole career. I've probably worked on 32 budgets here in the county. Everywhere I've gone, I have managed people in almost every department, really starting with libraries. Had to do a lot of management work there. But being the manager was never an objective. As a matter of fact, when Ron Carley left, one of the requirements the board gave me for acting was that I was not allowed to apply for the job. And I thought that was a little odd at first, but I didn't want the job, so I thought, fine, you know, this is great, because it actually gave me a lot of freedom to do the job in such a way that you really felt like, I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to make changes, and I'm going to do whatever has to be done to make it as, you know, productive a time that I can make it, thinking it would be a couple months. It went on 7 months, and that's a long time to be acting. And so we kind of had a conversation. I had a conversation with the board that you really need to hire somebody, or you need to have a conversation with me. And so they went and hired somebody. So that they brought somebody in, and he started. So I was actually relieved to go back to my old job, because being the deputy is like the greatest job, because you really have the opportunity to work with every leadership person in the county and to influence how the product is that's brought to the manager. And so that's a great, great job. And I was doing that for 5 years and loved it, absolutely loved it. So I was going back to my old job, and that's what I was going to do.
One of the things that occurred to me when you were promoted finally to the position of county manager was that you really broke the glass ceiling. You were the first woman county manager for Arlington County. Did that carry any sort of special weight or significance for you?
You know, I think I felt I was a generation after, like the GeraldineFerraros, that I think really broke the glass ceiling. I knew I was the first county manager, but as a woman, but I didn't think of it that way. I just felt like I was qualified, and they felt I could do the job, and I felt I could do the job, and I was going to do the best I could while I was here. When it hit me was after a couple of the early meetings, when people came up to me and little girls wanted their picture taken with me. And I felt like I was stunned. Like, why would you want your picture taken with me? Like, you're the woman in charge. And I thought, okay, then we still have work to do. That if little girls still want a role model in those positions. So that's when I started to take it very seriously, because we do the Bring Your Child to Work Day, and we do the different things. I have always tried to emphasize the importance and the fairness between men and women, and how you can be anything you want to be. And I was very fortunate. I was the youngest of 7 children, and my parents, really, and my father particularly said, you can do anything you want to do, and the sky's the limit. So I've always had that belief that you could work hard and do whatever you want to do. So for me personally, at first it didn't feel any different, but the people around me made me value it in a different way than I had done that. So yes, it was important, and I think it is important. My whole philosophy behind it was, don't screw it up, that's all, because they're going to be checking you left and right to make sure that you do a good job as a woman.
Exactly, exactly. We were talking earlier about your relationship with staff, and I think Jack and I would agree that you are beloved by Arlington County staff, and yet you had to make some pretty tough personnel decisions. You want to talk a little bit about the tension between liking people and connecting people as well as you do, but having to make the tough call?
Well, I think that part of it is I actually kind of grew up here in this system. So I was the first line employee. I was the first line supervisor. I became the manager. I became a department head. So having been in those different roles, you know the challenges that are before each employee. I had a lot of friends in the organization. And more importantly, and I think Bob Brosnan had said this in his discussion, and it's true, one of the reasons I stayed here as long as I did is because of the talent that we've been able to attract and retain here. We have always been an organization that has been able to get really bright people to come here. And when you're working with talented people that bring you good ideas and challenge the norm and make you think differently, you want to be there. And so I've made a lot of friends and trusted employees. And one thing that I think that I tried to do was kind of push it away and say, go back and do it. I'm not telling you how to do it. I want you to use your thinking on it. And you come back to me with something. And that allows people to engage. There's nothing worse for a manager to go back and say, here's what I want you to do and how to do it. And let me check these 10 boxes. And I've had bosses that have done that. And it's so demoralizing that I never wanted to do that. I really felt like, oh God, let's do something different here. So I think that just being respectful and fair and treating people with how you want to be treated. And so I have had the fortunate relationships with many staff here. But that, as I was talking to you a little bit earlier, that does not stop you from having to do the right thing when you have to discipline staff. If someone's not doing their job and you have to tell them, most of the time it's interesting, one of the lessons they teach you in disciplining employees is self-awareness, is to make them aware of some of their own faults. And once you do that, people then almost take ownership for it. So it's really not my problem, but it's your problem. Well, let me explain to you how that's impacting the organization. When you kind of transfer that back to the employee, though there's a whole different ownership that happens. And so that makes it a little bit easier on you as a manager.
So let's talk a little bit about, you've been here 30 years before you left the county.
32.
32 years. And you came out of financial background. And by definition, some of the finance is somewhat risk-averse, looking for certainty and predictability in what they do. But when we look back at your career, you've led and participated in some of the most innovative and imaginative projects the county's ever undertaken. You mentioned the Ballston garage, and then you came up with the idea to put a ice rink on top of it. Can you talk a little bit about, there seems to be a dichotomy. You're brought up as a finance person who wants to make sure certainty and predictability, yet you're out there doing these things that are imaginative, innovative, out of the box. And it just, I'd be interested in how you approach that.
So let's be clear. I didn't come up with the ice rink on top of the mall. That was Tom Newman who came up with that idea. And he's in economic development, and they're paid to think like that. They're trying to.
But you supported it.
Okay, I absolutely supported it.
You advocated it.
And absolutely, and I was a big part of helping to make that happen. Absolutely. What I have found as being a finance person is I do enjoy predictability. I do enjoy that. But the only thing I'm certain about is change. And change happens all the time. And what I learned as I got older, particularly with the ice rink, and particularly with economic development, which was an area I wasn't always comfortable with, but I had to learn to become more comfortable with it, was that you adapt what you think is absolute in your world, whether it's the finance, to what is a possibility and how it could happen. The biggest challenge I had on the ice rink was we had so many what's known as interested parties. We had so many people that had a vested interest in the property. To bring all of those people along to say, it's okay. I mean, I could spend 3 hours just telling you that one deal, to be perfectly candid. Just to give you an idea, the land is owned by Federated now, but it used to be May Company and Hex, okay? The garage is owned by the county. There's a part of the garage that was built 60 years ago, and there's a part of the garage that was built 30 years ago. Okay, that's all together. The county owns the structure. We don't own the land underneath it. The Forest City and May Company, now Federated, own the mall. Then there's another commercial building where Etrade was. That's another property that has to park their cars in the parking garage so that the income would come in to pay for the parking garage because we financed the garage and we needed to make sure that all the income. The Point parking lot, which is a separate building, was not allowed to have a garage underneath it because those people were to park in the garage. We allowed and negotiated them to put a garage underneath that building so that the county could have the 8th level opportunity to put the ice rink. Now, who would ever think that this could ever figure out or happen? But all these things had to happen over years of time to even allow for the opportunity for the ice rink on top. And then I was afraid for the county's sake that we were going to get stuck with this boondoggle. So I said to the Caps, you've got to bring your headquarters here. You've got to bring your offices here. We weren't really allowed to own an office building, but we made them do that so that I had them have an investment here and bring their offices here. So there was facets to this. This was not just a single deal. There was layers and layers and layers of work. So when people look at Ballston Mall and they're all, everyone wants to renovate and do, it is a great opportunity for us to reinvest and renovate there because Ballston Mall helped develop Ballston to what it is today.
Well, looking at it from a sports perspective, having kids who are hockey players, they have the ability to get ice time.
Right.
It's in the afternoon, which is what you negotiated.
Yeah.
And it's really kick-started the hockey program in all of Northern Virginia in terms of sports. I mean,
None of our high schools had hockey teams.
None, and they all do now, I think, to some form of fashion. So, again, it's a credit to...
It was a great thing, and actually the truth is, and people don't know all the deal of it, but the Washington Capitals pay the debt service. So whatever free time we get, that building is maintained from the income that comes into it. The county owns it, and the community gets ice time and the hockey teams get time. You pay for it, but it's better than driving to Reston or somewhere else in the region. And it's a great asset for this community. It's been fun.
Let's talk about a couple of other projects. Longbridge Park. Of course, I remember it when it was Twin Bridges Marriott because I had my senior prom there. And that was a long project, and you were involved in the early stages of that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So did you know Twin Bridges was the first Marriott hotel, I think?
I did not.
I think that's true. You might want to check me on that, but the county attorney's office was the lead on the negotiation with the county manager on the brownfield. I'm going to say it that way, the CSX site, which is now Longbridge Park. And this was not an easy job. I mean, I think it was Ron Carley that said the county doesn't do easy. The complications behind half these deals that we do take really a lot of work. And what happened was there are so many interested parties. This wasteland really was wasteland outside of Crystal City, but waterfront, I mean, views of D.C. I think it was Tony Gardner that really thought about it and said, this is land to get a hold of. And he really felt strongly that we should do it, that we started buying property all around it. There was a motel there that we bought and a few other things. And I think one of the theaters was down there. We had bought that property as well. It was kind of a mishmashy, nondescript area. But when it actually came to the land exchange to get the first phase of Longbridge Park, it was complicated. And I can remember in the early days, before technology, we would have conference calls. And there was either 25 or 30 lawyers on the phone just sitting there. And I can remember sitting with the county attorney's office trying to negotiate this because everybody wanted to reduce their risk. Because I think either Exxon or somebody and CSX train rail yards and oil and all this kind of stuff. And we knew, we had done the research and knew that we could actually utilize this land if we dealt with it properly and how we would, certify and make sure that the brownfield was capped. So it took, I'm going to say, a decade just to negotiate that land. So we got the land. Monument then bought the Twin Bridges site. That became a separate deal, which was a lot easier actually, because we traded land for that so that we could have one contiguous property. So where we are today is we had a bond referendum, and we built 4 fields with the opportunity for more fields when we're done. We're going to cover that parking and put another field up there. And then we bought the monument site with a land swap so that we could then take the Twin Bridges site and put the aquatics facility, connect the whole thing, and then put bike paths and all connect to the major trails that are in the region. This is a huge asset for our community. It's a huge asset for this region, and it's a huge asset for Crystal City. In Crystal City, you have to understand a lot was going on at the same time. When you think about it, Crystal City, and I'm going to go into BRAC here if that's all right, just to kind of talk about that. Because in 2005, I didn't get much of a summer because BRAC had happened.
Explain what BRAC is.
All right, so the base realignment and area closure, I believe it is, happens periodically when the federal government decides we have to relook at the military and the bases that we have and what we're going to do. And so we had already gone through the Navy moving out of Crystal City back in the early 80s, is my memory. And then we had already had, a number of different things. But we don't have a lot of bases. We have Joint Base Henderson Hall, really, in Arlington. So we weren't thinking in bases in the terms of bases, which is typically what BRAC does. But this was a different BRAC. Donald Rumsfeld tried to come out with a BRAC that said no leased space for the federal government. And that was a very different thing because Crystal City had evolved as space for the federal government. And Roslyn, a good part of Roslyn as well. In addition, Ballston. So when they wanted to put all of federal space in paid for on federal property to save money, this was and you have to understand that it wasn't that we were against the federal government trying to save money. Everybody's looking for ways to save money because you want to do the best that you can. But this was not Class A office space that a lot of the federal government was in. And so we were trying to figure out, okay, so what is the impact? The impact was the equivalent of 7 base closures. It was like 7 or 8 million people is my 7 or 8. I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you the right number.
Well, not only federal employees, but contractors.
Sure.
All
What-
the, well,
Sure.
the contractors are affiliated with them, are right close by. And so you want the contractors there because those are private sector jobs as well that are supporting the federal jobs. And then they begin to question, well, where should they be? So it was going to take years for the federal government to build out enough space to actually move this many people, except where they had other space in like Fort Hunt, Alabama, or Fort Meade, and then the Fort Belvoir is where they were going to build a lot of the buildings and move a lot of people to it. So it didn't happen overnight, but it happened over a number of years, and it's still happening. And some of the departments have renegotiated to stay where they could with it. But we lost so many jobs and so much in a very short period of time. Particularly hard hit was Crystal City. Roslyn also got hit, and so did Ballston. So at the same time, we're doing Longbridge Park, which is a huge asset for the Crystal City community. But it allowed us to rethink and do more planning, which is what Arlington is known for, is to really think about planning. And we did the Crystal City Plan. And what the intention of the Crystal City Plan was to say, okay, here's our opportunity to actually really rethink these buildings and how this community is structured down here and get it ready for the future. Because what Arlington always had was location. And so you have an airport across from Crystal City, you have rail, you have the metro that goes through Crystal City, you have major highways on either end of Crystal City, and so we could work with these developers, which fortunately the majority landowner was one developer, and figure out and say, would you be willing to take this building down? How can we help you rethink this opportunity? Now the recession hit in 2008, and it really has hurt a lot of the growth that could have come right after, as we're 2008, whatever year. I'm losing my years now, but the recession I think did hit in 2008.
2008, 2009, because it really affected
But
our budget.
when so it has changed some of the speed at which we had thought development would happen. But now we have the plan in place, and we have Longbridge Park, first phase built, and we're trying to help this community rethink the way it is. And they've gotten a number of plans approved, but they haven't started building a lot of the plans yet.
So talk a little bit, you mentioned, Diane was asking a question about how you dealt with staff, and we talked about that to some degree. But talk about how you move within the circles of the business community, the arts community, to achieve some of the goals you've achieved. Started with Crystal City, maybe moving to the Signature Theater in Shilton. But it strikes me in the time I've been with you is you move with ease within these organizations and companies and businessmen, and you can put them at ease, you can get them to have a discussion, and you can achieve the goals that satisfy their needs and satisfy those of the county. And I'd just be interested in your perspective of how you're able to move in those circles so easily and so successfully.
So you ever hear the story about the duck who's really paddling underneath the water and doesn't let people know? You got to do your homework, and you have to understand what's of interest and value to the people that you're working with. And every time that I have dealt with a developer, for the most part, and I would say that's probably, we've been very fortunate here in Arlington, that they're pretty straightforward. Everybody the fact that someone wants to come and invest in my community, a lot of money, I want to understand what their need is and what their ultimate goal is. And I want to make sure that they understand how we want them to acclimate to our community. And that means understanding the needs of the community, because our community wants the development and wants it there, but they want you to be a good neighbor as well. And so, it's very important for us to understand, A, what the community needs are, B, what the county thinks is a reasonable, responsible opportunity here. That's why we do so much planning, because the plan actually thinks through some of that. They're not definitive. They're a guide for how you're going to do things. And then you listen to the developer. Everyone has this impression that developers just want height, box, whatever. It hasn't always been that way. And what you want to do is help guide that developer to say, we don't want this boxy building. We want something different. And how can you help us get to that? Because the community doesn't want to look at that. And how are they going to go through this? So it takes a lot of work, and I will tell you that it isn't always, something that everyone walks out of the room and is really happy about. I've certainly had my share of arguments with the board and the developers when we're out in front of the community and we have to talk about these things, or when the board's taking action. There's been a number of cases where I've actually, been on the opposite side of one party or the other. But what I try to do is I take the professional staff, I have them give me their best advice on what they think it is, what we can do. You listen to what the community has to say, and very often there's reasonable solutions to a lot of what they want. And then you talk through the community to the developer. And the thing that frustrates me the most is you want to have it wrapped up. People don't like that, but you want to have it reasonably wrapped up because you don't want to get before the board and then you're last minute negotiating on something, because that almost makes us look foolish. I'd much prefer having an understanding of this is where we are, this is what we're going to do, and this is how you're going to get there. But know that you've done the work behind the scenes. It isn't that you've negotiated the deal behind the scenes. It's that you've done the work before you get there.
See, that's the most enchanting part of the Barbara Donnellan that I've seen, is that you're able to deal with those issues and disarm the people you're dealing with by candor and honesty.
Yeah,
And I
you
think
have
that's
to.
so Donnellan.
Well, it may be Donnellan, but what happens is you build a trust. And if you can build a trust with somebody who's not necessarily, trusting government per se, I'd have to say that the one thing that Arlington historically was interesting, and one of the beginning comments I wanted to say is Arlington historically has held values that were approachable, that were trustworthy, that you can talk to us. I mean, I can remember talking to several businesses that had come out of different jurisdictions saying, oh my God, this is the most attention I've ever gotten from a government in my life. And I'm like, well, we're here, and we're here to help you and to help figure it out. Doesn't mean I'm going to fix all your problems. It means that I'll listen. I mean, and that's really an important factor for a role that we can play.
So let me be giving you a couple fastballs here. You've been able to hit out of the park. Okay. Let me throw you a curveball. You said earlier that somebody once said that Arlington does not do the easy. It tries to achieve and set a goal. And in recent years, we've seen Arlington set that goal, put light rail into the community, call it the streetcar. Let's build an aquatic center. Let's see if that's possible to do. Signature theater. All these things that we thought the community supported and backed, yet as we went down the road, there was
Right.
discontent.
You forgot the artist here, but go ahead. Let's get them all on the table.
Okay. But, I mean, to you, what's happened to the community? You've been here 30 years. Has the community changed? Have the values changed? Because that's what really marked us as different. We put a metro in the middle,
Right.
not down 66, put it right down the middle of the corridor, and created a vibrant community. You built the Kettler ice plex.
Yeah, and not to take you down a different path, but I was thinking too about, in addition to those projects and how you approach them and manage the relationships, how did the Arlington Way and the philosophy of doing business in Arlington affect some of these decisions as you managed the board, the citizens, the commissions, the developers?
Well, I will tell you this. It has changed in recent years. It has changed, I'd say, in the last 6 years, more so than any of the other years. The community, we've always had, one of the things that I have always respected about Arlington is we've always had an elected body that had the long view, that always wanted to do the best. Build the metro, think about this. I mean, no one was surprised when the metro corridor got built because it was planned and people showed it, until you live next door to it and all of a sudden there was a tall building going next to you and you're like, whoa, where'd that come from? Well, we had planned for it. It was going to be happening. And I can remember no one was more disappointed. I remember at one point in the late 80s saying to Tony Gardner, where's all this, when's the revenue going to come? Because, I was in finance. And he's like, be patient. It will come. And all of a sudden, the revenue started coming off these buildings and things. But I think a couple things happened, because I think that people's trust of government at all levels has changed. I think it's not just local. I think that the federal level, watching Congress and how its inability to make decisions and get budgets done, and I think the economy has changed. And I think that what happens is people translate that at every level of government, including their local level. So it begins to build more distrust. I think that you have people that saw opportunities with bringing challenges to us. And we had, for the very first time, sort of an organized entity against the streetcar that was powerful enough to share a lot of misinformation in addition to just information. And so it was a challenge for us as employees because I hired professional staff to build a streetcar and to look at the transportation impacts and to figure these things out. And then I had to go hire communications staff to make sure that we were out there ahead of all this organized effort to change the opinions of people. It's interesting. So I think that there's more of a distrust in the sense of, challenging us than we had been challenged before. We have one of the biggest things happening in this community than we've had in decades, and that is growth in our school system. There is so many children coming, and there is not the planning fast enough to meet the concerns of the parents. Now remember, less than 20% of our families have children in schools. So when you look at the number of people, but they're very vocal, and they also are concerned about, is my kid going to go to school here or going to go to school there, or are they going to have a seat? How many children are going to be in a classroom? Because we've been known for good government in excellent schools. And, that is something that we as a government have always been working with schools on. But I think that built a certain sense in the community as well as, well, we're not sure we like the way this process is working, and we're not sure that we know how you're going to make those decisions. So I think that began to build some distrust. I think the ability to spend money on high-profile projects became an issue. Now, it's funny because I grew up in the Arlington that we would never consider renovating, building a new building. As a matter of fact, if we could get another year on a roof, we'd let it go for another 5. I mean, we really lived in a time when we didn't make investment in our buildings, that it wasn't until recently, and I'll give Mary Hines a plug on this because she really pushed the CIP and said, let's do some renovations and let's make an investment in our infrastructure. And that made a difference in how we approach things. But, the ice rink was probably the first major building in a long time. I mean, we did Arlington Mills since then, and we've done Longbridge Park since then. And we're now going to open our homeless shelter in a couple months. And we have the aquatics facility. And just to clear that up, the only reason the aquatics facility is not built is because the bids came in too high. The fact of the matter, it's been improved by the General Electric twice. And we hired experts to give us an estimate on what the costs would be prior to putting it out to bid. We were as surprised as they were. And then we tried, we're holding them accountable to go through line by line to say, where do we mess up here? And the difficulty with that particular project is we added in a really efficient heating and air conditioning into that system, which pools are not known for doing. And I think there was so much ambiguity on what that could actually do that the bids came in much higher because people didn't know what they were gambling with. So that could be tightened up, and that could be something that could happen in the future as well. So the streetcar had an entity that was kind of against it. The aquatics facility came in higher than where it was. So I just share these things because people are like, whoa, now where are you spending all your money on? The difficulty and one of the difficulties for me with the streetcar was 2/3 of the money was coming from elsewhere. That was not easily transferable to schools or capital projects or anything else. It was to be built and spent on transportation, particularly for that project. So by giving that project up, we lost a lot of money that was going to support that project. But I believe that the politicians at the time felt that it would help calm the community down and build enough trust back to say, we are smart enough that we will change course when needed. So I think that those are the things that Arlington also historically has been known for, is, you know, you do the right thing, but you also need to bring people along with you. And that's the Arlington way. And if you can't bring the people along with you, then you need to step and pause and look at it again and maybe update it. And I think that that's probably some of the things that are happening today even, is sort of, you know, what's going on and how people are looking at things.
Well, you've been talking, too, about the general erosion of trust in government. We see it certainly at the national level. We've experienced it at the local level. But then how do you get things back on track? I mean, when do you blow the whistle and say, okay, new day one
Right.
going forward, and what's the role of the manager?
Yeah.
A position that you recently left. What's the role of the manager in bringing out that rapprochement?
So I'm going to give you the three projects, too. You've talked about it. Another one that I can even bring up four that I think are important projects to talk about. Let's talk about the Artisphere. The prior manager really had worked very hard to get the Artisphere up and running and wanted to give that panache to the county to really have a cultural center that we had not had in this community. And in all fairness, the Artisphere had done some great things. It really did have acclaim that it was getting in the region. But it had lost the support and the trust of elected officials and some in the community, to the point where, as the manager, I had to make a lot of decisions. Now, I had kept it going for a couple of years, to be perfectly candid. I had really tried to keep the money in there and figure out, you know, how we could do things differently. We got a new business plan and tried to see if we could, you know, make it work. And it got to the point where I had to make a recommendation to the board on go or no go. And I think that the streetcar event had just happened with making a decision not to go, and I was trying to balance a budget, which, you know, needed to not, you know, in my opinion, raise taxes, and trying to figure out what to do. And so I felt that it was time to say, we could pull the plug on this. And I'll tell you, you know, some people may look at that as a failure and some people may not, but I look at it as great communities try things. And if they don't work, great communities pull away from things, or they rethink them. And I think that, you know, it was the right thing for the time, but do I think that it could have survived? The money that was going to the Artisphere is really, compared to a rec center, it's really equivalent. It's probably less than a rec center. The difficulty is I wasn't getting the traffic through it. And Roslyn, in and of itself, is going through a transition right now. In 5 years, you won't know Roslyn as it is today when Central Place is built. It'll be a totally different place, and some arts entity may come back there. That's option one. 2, Signature Theater. Let's just talk about that for a minute, because when Signature Theater was originally partnering with the county, and these partnerships are really important. When the county puts money somewhere, very often things happen. And when Signature Theater and the county built that library down in Shirlington, it was the last thing on that block. It was sort of like we stretched Shirlington a whole other place. We said there'll be a grocery store someday, there'll be a hotel someday, we're going to put some more restaurants and some apartments up here, and we figured 7 or 8 years all that would come. It was within 18 months, all of that was done.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it happened like that, off a metro line. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, so what's the economic value when you start putting an investment here and things start to happen? So I'm going to make an admission on this tape that I was the finance director, and I wanted Signature Theater to survive and thrive and share the profits. But I didn't know anything more about art than, you know, art growth or how things would happen than anybody else. And we probably should have, you know, done a little bit more research in making this deal happen. I mean, I worked with lawyers and everybody else. I was just one input into it. But some of the restrictions that we put in the original deal with Signature would never have been met, could never have been met. For them to survive and thrive and really do a good job, they were too onerous. But we didn't know that. So we amended the lease a couple times. And before I left as manager, we did what I think is probably one of the proudest things. And I'm sure there's people out there that think we're crazy, but we didn't give them anything. We really gave them a loan and said, you can pay us back over a number of years. After we did our due diligence with the banks, we did due diligence to find out if they can economically pay this loan back. And again, this is an asset that really has helped anchor that part of Shirlington and brought other development there as well. And so I personally think that Signature's on good footing to have a long, successful life there and will help us in Shirlington. So you have to be nimble enough to recognize, okay, this just isn't working, and how do you fix it to make it work for the long term?
Well, there's the impulse to fix it, but what I'm also hearing is a commitment to maintaining a balance of services in the county.
Oh, God.
We're not just one thing.
We aren't just one thing. And I think the one, if you talk about Arlington and its values, arts and education have been as important to everything that we do. People in this community value the diversity of the types of things that they can do with their children and their families. And arts is very, very important. And if you take that out of a community just arbitrarily, take away the libraries and take away the arts, you're really cutting the creativity. And I that wasn't something anybody wanted to do. Particularly, I did not want to do that.
Well, in so many years of your being involved in the finances, to maintain the balance of services, first-rate parks, first-rate theater company, first-rate schools, libraries, government services, that's a lot. And the challenges that you had and your directors several times of having to trim the budget to come in on budget, but not sacrifice the quality of services or the range of options that we have available to the citizens. That's quite remarkable. I was going to say, too, that the county has enjoyed many years of unabated triples, from the ratings agencies. How does that happen? How does that happen?
So we had a double AAA for many years before I even got into finance. In 1999, I took over as director of finance. So I've been involved in the rating agency since 1999. So that was about 16 years, and have been in some part involved in conveying information to them. But there's so many facets that go into their evaluation. First, you need a clean audit with a clean opinion. And that means that when outside people come in and look at your books, they're looking at, everything from whether you're overspent in your department or whether how you're doing with your friends at the library or whatever.
Sure.
So they look at all those things. And they look at our management. They look at how we set up reserves. They look at how we fund certain things. They look if the board is willing to increase taxes for priorities that they have set as policy. Many jurisdictions, in this region even, and I don't want to name names, but will go out and say, we're just cutting, slashing, we're just cutting whatever it is to get there because we can't raise taxes. In order to maintain a AAA, they're going to look at that balance. They're going to look at to say, are you willing to put your money where your policy and where your emphasis is and what your community wants? And I have to tell you that, and I've said this many times, it's okay, you can get to be AAA, but staying there is a different thing. And so I think that you have really strong finance people in this county still that know that you have to manage your money, you have to live to your policies, keep good fiscal policies, maintain them. Don't lose your way on projects, and when you do, correct it, rectify it, and figure out how to move forward. And, you don't hide things. You do the right thing. You have a fully funded pension system here. We're an envy of so many other places. I mean, we're almost 100% funded until yesterday. Who knows what happened? But you still have a very strongly funded pension system. Those are all things that the rating agencies look at. And they want to better understand how you are committed to making these things happen and going forward. So you might say, okay, so if you lose a AAA, what's the big deal? You borrow money at a little higher cost. It's more than that. It's a class of understanding that you will take these things seriously to maintain that you get to that AAA. It's an understanding that the way you're going to run your government is at such a level. It's a business that wants to come to a community that makes investments in its schools, in its roads, in its people. And those are all, that sends a whole different message than just borrowing money at a lower rate. So to me, a AAA was really part of the way that we were a community.
Mm-hmm.
Another aspect of your role as a manager and the huge amount of responsibilities being county manager in Arlington County, your role in terms of interjurisdictional work and the fact that you were involved with the COG, Council of Governments, and you were a leader of many of the major projects that were taking place, and where you had to balance the needs of larger counties like Fairfax County, Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Arlington, but those are very small jurisdictions like Manassas, Frederick, and that. Could you talk a little bit about that? You spent a huge amount of time.
Yes, it was, you know, as manager, it was probably one of a really huge growth opportunities because, you know, after 9/11, 9/11 changed a lot of us. I mean, that were here. You were here at 9/11. And, you know, I was in charge of finance, so that was an interesting place to be, to make sure there was resources and what went on at the Pentagon. But I think that what happened, what I did at COG was I chaired the committee that dealt with the money that came in, the UASI money, Urban Area Initiative, Security Initiative. These are funds that come to help support the entire region since 9/11 to help security in the region. And believe it or not, I was one of the senior people left because when Ron Carley left and Jim Hartman left and Craig Gerhardt left and, you know, Tony Griffin left. And I mean, like all these senior people that had been here from 9/11 and prior, there was a bunch of newbies. And even though I was considered senior because I had been here long within the county, more than anything else, but we had to bring people from the region together. Unfortunately, really the public safety team in this region is outstanding, outstanding. I mean, we are so fortunate to have a cooperative governments that really back each other up and know how to do things together. The difficulty was really breaking up $60 million and prioritizing it and figuring out how to disperse that money appropriately and coming up with a system. So I really spent 3 to 4 years just helping to revise the system so that we could figure out how best to move forward. So I feel very good leaving now because there's a project management office and there's now people that can step up and give reports and show what we've spent our money on. But really, it was a huge lesson in life.
And you were a leader in that area and well respected. And I mean, the role you did in that is amazing. But you add that to the work you were doing here in the county, 24 hours, 7 days a week.
Right.
Yet people will get up and
busy.
say, and how you refer to the county, my county, many times in this interview. Yet people have said, well, how does she know what's...
God, don't make me cry.
How does she know about Arlington? She doesn't live here.
She doesn't live here. Oh, my God, my biggest flaw in life. And I meant to say in the very beginning, when I got engaged, my husband lived in Buckingham. So,
oh, wow.
Come on. I mean, he paid $320 a month, and that was like a big deal. You know, I don't know anywhere as well as I know Arlington. And it was awkward how I came into the job, and one of the things is I had been established in Fairfax for 20 years with my husband. And, you know, our bridge partners live down the street, and our friends and people that you've established relationships with. And to be perfectly candid, at night, even though I had a ride home, I was able to go to the grocery store, and no one knew who I was. And I could, and you know, some people see that as a flaw. That some people say, well, you should have to go to the grocery store and take the conversation and abuse that people want to give to you. But you know, I probably gave 20 hours a day. And so my feeling was that I deserved a few hours of privacy to have some sanity and all that. And yeah, some people have said that's wrong. If I had known I was staying for 5 years, I probably would have rented an apartment or bought an apartment, but I really, at the time, didn't think I was going to stay that many years as manager. But anyone who thinks that my loyalty and understanding for this community, because I didn't sleep here, they're wrong. They're really wrong. To this day, it's so funny. I defend Arlington, and I'll see things, and I still get the news releases, and I'm constantly saying, yes, and we got this done and that done. But I'll always know Arlington better than anything.
We've got a couple of minutes remaining, and we've had a great chat about your terrific career here. What's next?
Oh God, that's like a hard question, Diane. That's why I just said to you, I want to go to lunch with you guys. You know, I needed a break, so I decided to run my B&B this summer. I'm only kidding, but we have a beach house, and I have to tell you that I've had company more than I ever expected. So I really do need a break still. And the one thing that I am doing, and I think I mentioned this to you, I'm working on a children's book. My sister recently passed away, and one of the things we were doing together was writing this children's book for her grandchildren on things she used to like to do. And so I have a very famous artist who's doing the illustrations, and I just signed a contract with him. And if we can get it published, we'll get it published. If we can't, then I'll just print it for family, and we'll do that. But that's one thing I want to do, because that's sort of a commitment that I made to her. And then I'm going to figure out what I need to do next. I feel like there's still something in me that I need to do. And I miss people tremendously, because that was so much of what I did, and enjoyed working with people. So I don't know what's next, but I'll let you know. I'll keep you informed.
Well, we predict a very exciting second act, so we hope to be part of it.
I don't know. We'll have to see.
So thank you very much for
Thank you
being with
very
us
much.
today, and that's a wrap.
That was great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.